this video, we're going to be talking about factoring quadratic equations or solving quadratic equations when we cannot factor them. So there is always a solution. It's just a matter of how do we find it. So again, the first thing that we need to do is we need to recognize this is a quadratic, and I know it's a quadratic because the highest degree is 2. The second thing is that in order for me to solve, I have to make this equal to 0. So that means I have to subtract 3 from each side of the equal sign. So then that gives me 5x squared minus 8x minus 3 equals 0. So now it's in standard form. So again, I just want to review that standard form of a quadratic would be y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. It has to be in this form. We're looking for the zeros, which means y is 0. So that's the same as saying 0 is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. It doesn't matter if the equals is on the left or on the right. These are both equivalent ways of saying the same thing. Okay, so when we go through this, let's just do this in our calculator. That would be the quick and easy way to find the zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and I put it in y equals, and then I go and I look at my graph, and I'm like, okay, I have 2 zeros there. So let's get the calculator to tell us what those zeros are. So I'm going to go to second trace. I'm going to have the calculator tell me what the 0 is. So I'm going to go to the 0. I have to read my calculator. Right here it says left bound. So I want to be left of this 0 here. Right now I'm right of it. So I have to move my cursor to the left. And it makes a little faint line. And that faint line or wall is to the left. Now it's asking me right bound, so I have to go to the right. So right now I'm right of the point I want. And I just push enter when it asks me to guess. When I look at the value of x, it says negative 0.3135529. Okay? So it says x is negative 0.3135529. Okay. The problem with this number is that if I were to approximate it, that there would just again be an approximation. It is not exact. Okay? I want an exact value. So let's go ahead and see if we have an exact value on the other side. Remember, when we take the zeros, we have to do it 2 times, or however many zeros we have. So I'm going to go second trace. I'm going to find the 0. It's asking me, am I left bound? Well, let's move it a little closer. So you can see there's a line that came in there. The point I want is right here. That wall or boundary is to the left of what I want. Now it's asking me right bound, so I'm going to move my cursor to the right. And you can see here, it made a wall to the right of that point. And now it's telling me the other 0 is x is equal to 1.91355529. If I were to do math frac on either one of those numbers, it will not give me a fraction. These numbers are irrational. Okay? So right away, I know, based on this, that the roots are real because it intersects, we have a y-intercept, and they're irrational. They're irrational because I cannot make a ratio or a fraction. So that means, how am I going to find my value of x? Because I can't factor it. If I were to try to factor, I would do 5x squared times negative 3, and I would get negative 15x squared, and my number in the bottom would be negative 8x. So I know x times x gives me x squared. Well, what are my factors of negative 15? Well, we could do 1 and negative 15. We could do 3 and negative 5. But there's nothing that's going to give me negative 8. Remember, one's positive, one's negative because 15 is negative. So this here won't work, okay? So this here, so that pen is not showing up very well. This here doesn't work, okay? Because there's no nice numbers that are factors. So that means we have to use the quadratic formula. Now it's a formula, and the formula helps us to solve for x. That's important to know. So the quadratic formula solves for x when y equals 0. So we can use a quadratic formula for any quadratic. So what is the quadratic formula? Notice it says x equals. So no x's go inside at all because we're looking for x. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we have to find what is a, what is b, and what is c. We're going to find those right up here. If I were to write ax squared plus bx plus c right underneath, because that's my standard form, I can see right here that a is 5, that b is negative 8, and that c is negative 3. Notice there are no x's here. Never ever an x, because we're solving for x. Okay, so we have to be careful when we substitute these numbers in. So always have your x equals. So notice this is negative b. So notice this negative multiplies to the b, and our b is negative 8. This negative is not that negative. They're two separate things. Plus or minus, when you do your b squared, put it in parentheses. Negative 8 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 3. Now the other thing I want to point out is that division line goes all the way from the front to the back. It's the whole thing. And then I'm going to do 2 times a. Take the time to substitute it in like that. So now I'm going to show you how we're going to do this nicely so we get what we want. So x is equal to a negative times a negative is a positive. I'm going to write my radical, leave that blank, put my division line. Remember, my division line goes from the beginning all the way to the end. 2 times 5 is 10. So I'm going to show you this part on the inside. Do in your calculator. And you're going to do it in one step. This part here, let me just tell you right now, that's called a discriminant, and we're going to talk about that in a future video. So that part right there is the discriminant, and I'll tell you what that is later. But right now we're going to have our calculator do this. So we're going to turn on our calculator, go to your regular screen. Now notice what I'm going to do. I'm ignoring the square root, only under the square root. I put parentheses, negative 8 squared minus 4 times 5. Notice I'm using my parentheses as multiplication, times negative 3. So So notice my calculator looks exactly what has been highlighted. That's a discriminant. So what do I get? I get 124. Okay, so now I have to simplify this. So I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to simplify what's underneath the radical. So I have to simplify the square root of 124. So I want to, well, let's find our factors. I'm going to show you the long way right now, and later on I'll show you a shortcut. Let's find our factors of 124. So you may have recalled that you can find your factors real nicely by doing 124 divided by x in your calculator, and then you can find, this needs to be changed. We're going to change this every 1, not every 0.1. Okay, so we have 1 times 124, 2 times 62, 4 times 31, and we could probably stop right there actually. So I don't think we're going to get any more. That's as far as we're going to go. Okay, so now what I'm going to look for is where is a perfect square. So you need to remember what your perfect squares are. So I'll write this like this. Your perfect squares is 1 squared, which is 1, 2 squared, which is 4, 3 squared, which is 9, 5 squared, which is, 4 squared, which is 16. Okay, and I really don't need to go any further than that because I can see that there's a perfect square right here. So 4 is a perfect square. So that means I can rewrite this to be the square root of 4 times 31, which is the same as the square root of 4 times the square root of 31. 31's prime, by the way. The square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 31. So what I've just done here, this number here is the same exact number as all of this. They are equal. So that means that I have x is equal to 8 plus or minus 2 square root of 31 all over 10. So that can be simplified. I have two fractions. I have 8 divided by 10, and I have 2 square root of 31 divided by 10. So 2 goes into all of those numbers. So x is equal to, if I divide 8 by 2, it's the greatest common factor. If I divide 8 by 2, I get 4. If I divide 2 by 2, I get 1. And if I divide 10 by 2, I get 5. So you might be wondering, what is this plus or minus? So this plus or minus means I have two roots. X is equal to 4 plus the square root of 31 divided by 5, or x is equal to 4 minus the square root of 31 over 5. So these are my answers. They're exact answers. They're not approximations. If I were to put them into my calculator, let's take the first one and I'll show you. If I were to put the first one into my calculator, I'm going to go alpha F1 to get my fraction, and I'm going to do 4 plus the square root of 31. All of that is divided by 5, and I get 1.1913552.873. Notice that 9 was rounded, so notice I got the same number. So you can trust me that if I were to do the minus, I would get the other number. So this is what you have to do when you cannot factor, when your quadratic is not factorable and you're asked to solve for x. You have to use the quadratic formula.